In America, the Environmental Protection Agency is the regulatory body responsible for coming up with federal regulations. And Congress has mandated through several laws in the past that the EPA consider cost and benefit, both of these, cost-benefit analysis to determine environmental regulations. All right, so we're going to start with talking about how pollution is defined in terms of economic terms. So there's an entire field of study called environmental economics, and in that field, pollution is defined as an externality. So what that means is that someone producing pollution, whether that be a manufacturing plant or a city, if they release that pollution into the environment, get it away from their sort of black box, their plant or their city, if they put that out into the environment, it's external to them. And the effects of that pollution, they might not feel. There really is no economic reason that a city or a manufacturing plant would control pollution. Okay, so what this means is that if a federal government wants to control pollution, they must somehow pass the cost of that pollution back to the polluter. And so what this does is it internalizes that cost. So ultimately, they pass that cost back to the consumer. And so what that ends up doing is raising price. So someone ultimately has to pay for that pollution. A government has two ways to promote pollution control. They can first pass a regulation. When polluters don't meet that regulation, then they're fined. And so this is where the economic requirement comes in. The second way is for there to be an economic incentive. The government doesn't require regulation, but they encourage it through free market means. And so an example of this is the Energy Star sticker that is available on many appliances in the United States. What the government has done is they've come up with a program, Energy Star program. And so a manufacturer can come to them and they can say, look, my refrigerator uses less energy, is more efficient, meets some sort of criteria the government's come up with, and the government allows them to put the sticker on their appliance. I, the consumer, go shopping for a refrigerator. And there's a refrigerator that has this sticker, and there's a refrigerator that doesn't. Obviously, I'm going to want to pay less electricity, and so I probably am going to choose the Energy Star appliance, all other things being equal. And so, in this way, the manufacturer believes they're going to make more money because they are going to sell more product. The first sort of models about how to come up with the exact number, the exact, criteria for the allowable concentration of a pollutant in the environment came out of a pretty simple model that was actually applied to a farm. And I've actually posted the original paper on Blackboard, and I'm gonna highlight it. It's a little bit hokey. It's funny, and so I'm gonna show it to you here because I appreciate that many of you might not actually, go and read this document. I'm going to highlight a few things here. First, the paper was written about Old MacDonald, who had a farm, so it's a little bit hokey. And Old MacDonald had a daughter who was taking classes in epidemiology and probability. And the farmer also had a problem that there was a waterborne disease at the farm that was reducing his profit because his animals were getting sick. And in this model, he makes up a make-believe animal called a firthing. A herd of firthings is what this is written about. So this daughter who was taking classes came up with a model to quantify the cost of either buying a treatment system for the water or allowing the firthings, the make-believe animals, to keep getting sick. All right, so kind of goes through here. There's a salesman, young Sam. He comes to the farm. He's honest and candid. I don't know why that's important, but it's kind of funny. And he is trying to sell them a disinfeclaminator, which is going to rid the water from this waterborne illness. All right, so this very intelligent daughter comes up with this equation 6. And so what equation 6 does is sets a concentration for the pathogen, for the disease in the water. So this is the concentration of the pollutant, XC, and it's going to be a function of several things. Essentially, those are all of the factors that add up to cost. Essentially comes up with an equation of the concentration of a pollutant and relates that to cost. All right, so the daughter takes this to the professor, and the professor is brave. He wishes to apply the model to people. And so this is where this paper gets interesting, because it's not a far stretch for us to talk about putting a cost on an animal in an agricultural economy. And it's harder for us as a society to think about putting a value on human life. But essentially, it's important for you to understand that when you set a regulatory limit, and that regulation has some public health implication, you are setting a value on disease, on life. All right, so this paper ends very, very funny ending here. I'm going to kind of scroll down. That the professor concludes with an E-I-E-I-O. Okay, that was the bad joke I promised. The equation that is presented in this paper is, again, the concentration of the pollutant, XC, and that's going to be the concentration at which the standard should be set. And then on the right-hand side of the equation here, you have cost functions. You have the annual cost of the treatment system. And then you have damage, the damage function, and the annual benefit. And so I'm going to define these later as damage cost and treatment cost. Okay, so if we look at this equation, I am going to now demonstrate how this can be viewed in a graphical manner. What we're going to do here is plot the total cost of pollution control against pollutant concentration. On the y-axis, we're going to put cost, and this is going to be in terms of dollars. And on the x-axis, we're going to plot the concentration of the pollutant. And this is the allowable concentration of the pollutant. And it'll have units of mass per volume. Typically in environmental concentrations, we usually are going to work in micrograms per liter or milligrams per liter. So we're always working at very low concentrations for allowable concentrations, and that will make more sense when we do risk calculations next week. All right, so if we think about this, it should be fairly intuitive for us to say, okay, if we're going to allow a high concentration of a pollutant, and we'll just say 100 milligrams per liter, if we're going to allow that much pollutant into the environment, the cost of controlling, the cost of treating that pollution will be very low. And so treatment costs go down as the allowable concentration of the pollutant increases. If you consider, though, how much damage would be allowed, how many people would get sick if you allowed a really high concentration of a pollutant? Well, probably the damage cost would be high. Damage costs include healthcare, loss of worker productivity, because when you're sick, you don't work as hard, you don't produce as much economic product in your life. Environmental implications, so you might have loss of productivity of both humans and environment. So I'm going to write here human and ecosystem. The productivity might be crop yield. It might be human worker efficiency as well. So damage costs can encompass a lot of a lot of things, and some of them are hard to quantify, but the EPA has to try to do that when they set these regulations. So if you allow a lot of pollutant in the environment, your damage cost is going to be high, and it'll be inverse. So if you allow a very small amount of pollutant in the environment, your damage cost is very low, but it's going to cost you a lot of money to treat your media, your water, your air, to get to that concentration. All right, so if we want to look at the total cost, we simply add the two lines together all the way across the graph, and you end up with something that looks like this. If we wanted to look at this data and set a limit, theoretically, we would pick the limit that had the lowest cost, total cost. And so we would come down and we would draw a line, and we would set a regulatory limit that met that minimum cost. And that's one way that the government could set a regulation. Now, when you do this, you have to understand that you were saying that the damage cost, which includes human health implications, ecological implications, is counted given the same weight as the treatment cost. And there's plenty debate to be had in that conversation.